Urgent! Iran has decided to challenge Donald Trump at the most delicate moment of the crisis. And the image coming out of the Middle East this Wednesday, April 22, 2026, is one of tension that hasn't lessened, it has only changed form. The ceasefire, which was close to ending, was extended by the United States, but Tehran did not send the signal of backing down that Washington wanted. On the contrary, the current stance is one of open defiance, with signs of hardening, a refusal to accept pressure, and a display of strength in broad daylight. I'll tell you all about that in a moment, but right now you'll want to subscribe to the channel to stay well informed with real-time information and the best journalistic quality you've ever seen, here on Milson Alves News. What happened was an uncomfortable turn for the White House. Hours before announcing the extension of the truce, Trump told CNBC that he didn't want to prolong the ceasefire and stated that, without an agreement, the attacks could resume. He even said that he hoped to go back to bombing because that would be, in his words, a better way to negotiate. But after that, what followed was a different decision. The pause was kept in place indefinitely to make room for an Iranian proposal after a request from Pakistan. In practice, Trump threatened, pressured, escalated the rhetoric, and at a decisive moment gave more time. At the center of this deadlock are, on one side, Trump, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and the U.S. National Security Team. On the other side, the Iranian leadership, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, and the negotiators connected to the regime. In the middle, Pakistan appears, trying to act as a bridge for a conversation that, at this moment, remains stalled. J.D. Vance's trip to Islamabad was first postponed and then put on hold indefinitely, because the Iranian side hardened its position and did not provide the level of involvement the Americans expected. This shows that diplomacy has not progressed. It got stuck at a critical point. When did this get worse? Between the end of April 21 and the morning of April 22, that was exactly the moment when everyone was watching to see if the truce would end and if the bombings would resume. Instead, the crisis entered an even more dangerous zone, with no real peace, no finalized agreement, and no trust between the parties. It's this kind of scenario that produces the most disturbing images, because every gesture starts to serve as a military and political message. Where did this message become most visible? In two places. First, on the diplomatic route between Washington, Islamabad, and Tehran, where negotiations stalled. Second, in the strategic space of the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz itself, where Iranian pressure remains active. The Associated Press reported on Wednesday that Iran fired at ships in the Strait of Hormuz, intensifying attacks on shipping and further complicating efforts to resume talks. This is important because it shows that the crisis is not frozen. Even with the air truce preserved, the maritime front remains on fire. How did Iran issue this challenge? First, by rejecting the logic of pressure. An Iranian official told Reuters that Tehran could even discuss with the United States in Pakistan, but only if Washington abandoned its policy of threats and pressure. The same report highlighted the demand to end the naval blockade and the issue of the Iranian ship Tosca seized by the Americans. This means that the regime did not want to come to the table as the cornered side. The message was different. Iran would not agree to negotiate under the shadow of surrender. Then came the second move, even more loaded with symbolism. The Tasnim news agency, linked to the Revolutionary Guard, was used to signal that there was no decision to send a delegation to Islamabad while the naval blockade remained in place. Axios also reported that Tasnim itself informed, through Pakistani mediators, that the Iranian team would not be present at Wednesday's round and did not see any prospect of participating. In simple terms, Tehran decided not to pursue the conversation. It did the opposite, left Washington waiting for a response, stalled the process, and tested how far the other side would maintain the threat. Iran challenges Trump because it sensed hesitation. Trump had stated that he did not want an extension. He spoke of strength, resuming attacks, said that time was up. But at the decisive moment, the truce was extended. This contrast weighs heavily. For the Iranian regime and for the Revolutionary Guard, this may have been read as a sign that the American threat still doesn't scare them, but it's not automatic. And when the other side suspects that the attack might not come, they tend to raise the stakes. The signs of military escalation have also increased. Reuters reported on April 19th that Iran is replenishing and upgrading missile launchers and drones at a faster pace than before the war. According to the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Aerospace Force in a statement reproduced by Milson Alves News, this is not a small detail. It means that, despite the attacks suffered, the regime's launch apparatus remains active, being rebuilt and put back into operational condition. When you add this scenario to Tehran's tough rhetoric, the impression that emerges is one of increased readiness. At the same time, videos and reports circulated showing heavy missiles being displayed on urban streets and at public events as a form of provocation and demonstration of strength. The Associated Press itself reported that hardline supporters of the regime took part in events where the Revolutionary Guard displayed missiles and launchers, in a clear gesture of defiance against Israel and the United States, with large missiles placed in plain sight as a political and military message. From this, the growing speculation is that the regime wanted to send a very precise message. The launchers are still operational, the missiles are still available, and the cost of a new American offensive could be high. In other words, the regime wanted the world to see the missiles, wanted Washington to know they are still there, and wanted to turn doubt into a weapon. In this case, doubt is worth almost as much as the launch itself because it increases fear, stalls decisions, and puts pressure on the adversary even before any attack happens. On the United States side, there was also a clear sign of preparation. Trump said the military was ready to act. The approach adopted by Washington continued to be to maintain the blockade of Iranian ports and preserve the ability to strike again. But here's the difference. American readiness was accompanied by political restraint, while Iranian readiness was accompanied by public display and defiant rhetoric. And in the battle for perception, that changes the picture of the moment. The side that shows firmness seems to advance. The side that threatens and then holds back seems to retreat. There's also an internal calculation. The regime faces divisions, pressure, and strain. But precisely because of this, the Revolutionary Guard tends to speak louder in these moments. When the hardline faction senses that the opponent hesitated, they use that to argue for fewer concessions and more confrontation. Axios reported that sources linked the Iranian delay to pressure from the Guard to maintain a tougher stance, with no dialogue, as long as the blockade continues. This detail helps explain why. The challenge is not just external. It also serves to reorganize power within Iran itself, strengthening the sectors that thrive on constant confrontation. The result is explosive. Iran projected the image of a regime that, even when wounded, still has the means to intimidate, delay, provoke, and raise the cost of the crisis.